Hello. This recording is going to complete study unit 2 of the analysis of derivatives textbook. In the previous weeks, we've been going through the second study unit in the textbook, namely forward contracts. And to date, we've managed to cover some important concepts. We've managed to define and look at examples on equity forward contracts. And we've also looked at currency forward contracts. And under currency forward contracts, we looked at both currency forward contracts with discrete rates, but we didn't look at continuous rates. Sorry, I also left out from this list bond forwards. We've also looked at bond forward contracts. So if you remember, we said that in the study unit on forwards, we have the following important forward contracts to look at. I said that for the exam, you need to know about equity forward contracts, and we looked at this. We also talked about in general how to price a forward contract, and we looked at currency forward contracts, and we looked at fixed income bond forward contracts. So in this video, I'm going to take you through interest rate forward contracts, and then we'll be done with chapter 2 of the textbook, right? But before I look at forward rate agreement, interest rate forward contracts, I just want to briefly look at an example involving a currency forward contract where we have continuous rates. Remember, we said that for calculating the forward price of an equity or a currency, you can have discrete risk-free rates and you can have continuous risk-free rates. So it's always important that when you've been given a question, to read the question carefully to make sure that you identify whether or not you're dealing with discrete rates or continuous rates. If you're dealing with discrete rates or continuous rates, you will use different formulas, so that's very important. Whereas if you are dealing with continuous rates, you will use different formulas, right? So we talked about some of these formulas in the last class and we wrote them down. I'll just put them up on the screen just to remind you. Okay, we talked about these formulas. For example, a currency forward contract, this is for discrete risk-free rates. This one, these formulas. And for continuous risk-free rates, these are the formulas. And then for a currency contract, these are the formulas for discrete rates for the forward price and the value. And these ones where you have an E and exponential, these are for continuous rates. Okay. So I want us to look at an example on determining the forward price and value of a currency forward contract where you have continuous rates. And once we are done with that, it will mean that we've gone through equity forwards, currency forwards, discrete and continuous. We also went through equity forwards, discrete and continuous. And if you remember, we also looked at bond forwards. I just forgot to write them here, but we looked at fixed income forwards, also known as bond forwards. So we also looked at these. So to date, we've managed to touch bond forwards, equity forwards, currency forwards. I just want us to look at an example on currency forwards, continuous rates. And then lastly, I'll take you through forward rate agreements. Okay. So the example that I want us to look at, it's an example from a past exam paper, right? But before we do that, if you want to determine the forward price of a currency forward contract, you use this formula right here. I think we talked about it last time. Remember, this part can be T, where this is the time in years. Remember, we always change our time to years. S0 is the spot exchange rate. RDC is the continuous domestic risk-free rate. RCF is the continuous foreign risk-free rate. And D over 365 is the time the number of years until expiration. So we put this in years. And then at the same time, to determine the value of a currency forward contract, if you have continuous rates, you say ST multiplied by the exponential of minus RCF, open bracket T minus small t, minus FT. This is the forward price you will have calculated before, exponential minus RD, open bracket T minus T. Okay. So ST would be the spot exchange rate at time T if you're determining the value of the contract at time T. And small letter t is the time that has elapsed since the start of the contract. Right. So I want us to look at this example right here. This example, it's an example from module RSK 4805, a past exam paper. Remember, INV3703 just looks at the first 5 chapters of this module, whereas RSK 4805 goes up to the end of the textbook. It looks at all 9 study units. I think it's 8 or 9 study units. So I'm just combining these classes in RSK 4805 and INV3703 class, because you both cover the first things up until the 5 chapters, and then I'll continue with the rest of the course with the individuals in RSK 4805. So the questions do overlap. They're the same types of questions as in each module, only that one module looks at the first 5 chapters, whereas the other module looks at all 8 to 9 chapters in the textbook. So I want us to look at this question from an RSK 4805 past exam paper. So the question that I want us to look at is from May-June 2018 for the RSK 4805 paper. So the question says, an analyst, a United States analyst, wishes to enter into a forward contract on the Japanese yen. He gathered the following discrete risk-free rates. So the analyst got the following domestic risk-free rates and the following Japanese foreign rates. And then we're given the spot exchange rates between the United States and Japanese yen. So it's $0.085. And then firstly, they wanted us to calculate the continuously compounded US and Japan risk-free rates. So they want us to change discrete rates into continuous rates. And we know that when we want to change discrete rates to continuous rates, we use the following formula. So please put the video on pause, try to substitute into this formula to see if you get the answer. And then when you're done, press play, and then I'll show you how to do the calculation. Okay, so I hope you were able to do that calculation, and hopefully you got the following answers. For the domestic rate, the continuous risk-free rate is 0.0677. For the foreign rate, the continuous risk-free rate is 0.0535. I'm going to put the calculator up on the screen just to illustrate to you how that is actually done. Okay, I hope you can see it. Right, so for you to do the following calculation, let's say you would want to do the following calculation. We have 7% and 5.5%. Okay, so you use the natural logarithmic function on your calculator, right? And the function, I'm hoping that we all have the same type of calculators. If unfortunately we have different calculators, it will be tricky, but I'm working with a sharp right here. So to get the domestic continuous risk-free rate for the US dollar, you press ln right here, and then you say open bracket, then it's 1 plus 0.07 close bracket, and then you press equal to, and you get 0.06766 or 0.0677, at least 4 decimal places when you're rounding off. And then for the United States, for the Japanese continuous risk-free rate, we press ln again, then open bracket, 1 plus 0.0 0.055, right? And then we change that to 0.0535. So those are the two continuous risk-free rates. Okay, those are the continuous risk-free rates. So that's how you calculate and you use the ln function. Okay, let's go back. So we get those two answers. And then the next part of the question says, calculate the arbitrage-free forward price that expires in 90 days. Calculate the arbitrage-free forward price that expires in 90 days using continuously compounded risk-free rates. Right. So here they want us to determine the forward price of the currency forward contract. And we know that if we have a currency forward contract with continuous rates, we use the following formula to determine the forward price. You take your spot rate multiplied by the exponential open bracket RDC, which we've calculated the continuous risk-free rate, minus RFC, which we've calculated the continuous foreign rate multiplied by the time. So again, please put the video on pause, right? Try to use this information, the 90 days and the rates that we've just calculated. Try to use these and that information to determine the arbitrage-free forward price that expires in 90 days using continuously compounded risk-free rates. Okay, so I hope you were able to do that calculation. Hopefully, you got the following answer, 0.0853. Remember, we always start by changing our time into years. So this is 90 days. So we say 90 divided by 365, and we get 0.242466. And then we substitute into our formula, and we get 0.0853. So let me just substitute this into the calculator on the screen to help some of you who might struggle with calculator technique. So to do this question, we say 0.0, okay, sorry, back, 0.0853. Second function, exponential. The exponential is right there above the ln. Then we open brackets. Then we open brackets again. We open two brackets. Then we say 0.0677 minus 0.0. Sorry, 0.0535, close brackets, times our time, which is 0.2466, close bracket. And then we get our answer. Okay, so let's just repeat that again. It's 0.085, then second function exponential, open bracket, and then open bracket, 0.0677 minus 0.0535, close bracket, multiplied by 0.2466, close bracket. Yeah, this is the right answer. I think I pressed something incorrectly before. So we get 0.0853. If you want, you can also first simplify the top part before you put it to exponential. But this is the calculation. So you can just try to enter this into your calculator to see if you get the same answer. Okay. Right. And then after that, we are told it is now 25 days later. Calculate the value of the forward contract assuming a spot exchange rate of 0.087. Now 25 days have passed and they now want us to determine the value of the forward contract. They want us to determine the value of the forward contract if the spot exchange rate is now 0.087. So if we have continuous rates, we can determine the value of our forward contract. And the way we do this, we use the following formula. We say ST, which is the current spot rate, exponential minus RCF, the continuous risk-free rate, multiplied by T minus T, minus FTE minus RCB, multiplied by T minus T. Remember, small t is the number of years that have passed since the beginning when you entered into the forward contract. We've been given ST. We've been told that ST is 0.087. We know what RCF is. We calculated it before as 0.0535. We know what RCD is. We calculated it before as 0.0667. So we can get T as 25 over 365. So these are the number of days that have passed since the beginning. We know what ST is, and we can get T minus T by taking our original T of 0.2466 minus the small t of 0.685, and then we get this answer. And then now we need to substitute everything into our formula for value. So once again, please put the video on pause. It's always helpful to try these calculations. Try to substitute everything that I've given you. And when you're done, press play, and then we can compare answers to see if you get what I have. Okay, so hopefully you were able to do that calculation, and hopefully you got 0.019, right? The calculation for this part should give you 0.0862, and the calculation for this part should give you 0.0843. Let me just punch this into the calculator again, just to illustrate to you how that calculation is actually done. Okay. Let me put that up. Okay, so let me put up the calculator. I just want to show you how that calculation was done. Okay, so firstly, I want to illustrate how I got the calculation for the first part. The first part was 0.0862. I just want to show how I got 0.0862. I want to illustrate how I got this first part, right? So to get that first part, you proceed as follows. You say 0.087, right? Then you say second function exponential, then open bracket minus 0.0535 multiplied by 0.1781, and then you close brackets and you get 0.0862. So that's how we got that first part. And then the second part that we subtracted, this part of 0.0843, I'll also illustrate how I got this, okay? To get the second part, I said 0.0853, second function exponential, open bracket, minus 0.0677 multiplied by 0.17, sorry. Okay, yeah, multiplied by 0.1781, close bracket. And then you get 0.0843 if you round off to 4 decimal places. So that's how I got these two values, and then I subtracted them, and then that gave me 0.019. Okay, so this is the value of the contract. And then because the answer is positive, it means it's a gain to the long party and it's a loss to the short party. So make sure you're comfortable with your calculator when it comes to exponentials and logarithms, and also make sure you're comfortable with regards to these questions on currency forward contracts and so forth. So now we've covered equity forward, we've covered currency forward, both discrete and continuous, and we've covered bond forward contracts. I just forgot to write them up on the list, but we've also covered bond forward contracts. So I now want to take you through forward rate agreements, which is the last section on the section on forward contracts. I'm just going to take you through that in the remaining part of this video. Right. So we have what are known as forward rate agreements, FRAs, and we define these as follows. These are derivative contracts to borrow or invest a given amount at a specified interest rate for an agreed amount of time at a specified date. They are also known as interest rate forward. So in other words, let's say you want to borrow money in the future, but for a certain amount of time, but you're afraid that interest rates are going to go up. You're afraid that by the time you want to borrow, it might be too expensive for you to borrow, right? You can enter into a forward rate agreement. This is a contract which will guarantee the rate that you can borrow at. Likewise, let's say you want to invest money in the future. You want to lend or invest money in the future, but you're afraid that by the time you want to do so, interest rates will have gone down. So you can enter into a forward rate agreement to make sure that the interest rate you're going to receive is guaranteed, right? So whether you're borrowing and you want to guarantee your interest rate, or whether you are investing and you want to guarantee your interest rate, you can enter into a forward rate agreement, an FRA. It's just an interest rate forward. It's like you're buying an interest rate or you're selling an interest rate and you are fixing the price today, okay? So there's some important terminology you need to know before we start looking at calculations. The first terminology is what we call a euro dollar or a euro dollar time deposit or a euro dollar investment. And a euro dollar, this is an investment of US dollars. This is an investment of US dollars in a place outside of the USA. So let's say you have a British bank that invests US dollars with a Japanese bank. We call that a euro dollar investment because they are transacting in US dollars and they're doing this outside the USA. So it's a form of time deposit. You put money into the bank, into a bank or into an investment for a certain amount of time, then you get the money afterwards with interest. But you're dealing in US dollars and you're outside the United States, right? Then we also have what we call the London Interbank Rate of Borrowing, LIBOR. And we define LIBOR as this is the rate of borrowing dollars. This is the rate of borrowing dollars, or sometimes we just say the rate of borrowing money between London banks. So let's say London banks are dealing in dollars. They are investing dollars with each other. So there's an interest that they get for their investment. And the interest rate that they receive, we call that a LIBOR rate. We call it a LIBOR. We call it an interbank offer rate. Banks charge each other when they borrow or lend US dollars between each other outside of the United States. Or more easily, we could just say it's the rate at which banks borrow or lend money between each other. But in particular, it's US dollars, and these are London banks. So we also have what we call LIBOR, right? So let's say you want to guarantee this LIBOR rate. Let's say you want to make sure that come a few months later when you invest, the rate that you can get is guaranteed, this LIBOR rate is guaranteed. Or let's say you want to borrow and you want to make sure that the rate that you get charged when you borrow, this LIBOR rate is guaranteed. You can enter into a forward rate agreement, right? So before we look at that, let's just look at some two common calculations that they sometimes ask in the exam and in assignments, just so you become familiar with LIBOR and some of the calculations you might be asked, right? So when we are dealing with LIBOR, right, there are two things we need to remember. There are two important. Firstly, you have to know how to calculate the amount that a person will owe if they borrow money through London interbank borrowing rates. Let's say you're a London bank and you go to another bank and you borrow money for a certain number of days. How much money will you pay back in total? We say that how much money do you owe in total? So you need to be able to calculate the amount of money a person owes in total, a bank or an institution owes in total if they borrow money. And we say that we've added interest on. For example, if you borrow money for a certain amount of time, you have to pay interest on that money borrowed. So this is the formula. This formula will be given on the exam paper. It's right here. You see, they said add on interest. If you borrow a certain amount of money using London interbank borrowing rates as a bank, the total amount of money you'll pay back after a certain number of days is given by this formula. We're adding on interest. Okay, so this is an important formula. We take the principal multiplied by 1 plus the interest rate times days over 360. And then we also have what we call treasury bill. A treasury bill, this is the next type of investment. And you also have to be able to calculate the price of a treasury bill. Treasury bills work with what we call discount interest or a discount rate. So with a treasury bill, what happens is that a borrower borrows money. Let's say they borrow 90,000 rand, and then they agree that after a certain number of days, maybe let's say after 60 days, they'll pay back this 90,000 rand as 100,000 rand. So this is an example of a treasury bill. It's issued by the government, actually. The government borrows money. They might borrow 90,000 rand, and then after a certain number of days, they give you back the principal. They give you back 100,000 rand, like they add some interest on. So because the money they borrow is less than what they pay you, and they pay you back the principal, like amounts like 100,000 and so forth, we say we use a discount rate. So you also have to be able to calculate the price of a treasury bill, a treasury bond. And a treasury bill is a short-term investment. It's a bond that matures in less than a year. But I'm sure they won't ask that. What you just have to make sure you know, how to calculate the total amount owed if you're adding on interest and you borrow money using London interbank borrowing rates, and how to get the price of a treasury bill if we've been given a discount rate and the government issued the treasury bill for a certain number of days. So these are two important formulas you have to know about. Okay, two very important formulas. The one with discount interest is the one for treasury bills, and this one is the one for ordinary London interbank of LIBOR transactions between banks. So let's look at question 1A and question 2 in the prescribed textbook, the section on forwards. Let me see what page number it is. I think the problems are found on page 143. Yeah, the question is on page 143. So I'll just scroll to page 143 and then we'll look at this example. So this is the example I want us to look at right here. Sorry, no. Is it actually page 140? Okay, these are futures contracts, not page 143. It's actually in the study unit before. I'll just open that. It's actually, there we go. Yeah, it's actually page 67. So I want us to look at question 1A and question 2 just to show you how these discount rates are applied and how add-on interest is applied, right? So we will start with question number 1A, which says, calculate the price of a treasury bill with a face value of $10,000, 153 days to maturity, and a discount yield of 1.47%. Okay. So I want you to try this question. I want you to try to get the price of the treasury bill. I want you to substitute in this information using your calculator and see if you can get the price. And then when you're done, you can press continue, and then you can compare what you did with what I did. So try to substitute the principal multiplied by 1 minus the discount rate, and let's see what you get to get the price of the treasury bill. Okay. Okay, so I hope you were able to do that calculation, and I hope you got the following answer, 9926.05, right? This question is a bit easy to do, so I don't think I need to show it to you in the calculator. I think you'll be okay with this. What you just need to remember is that with a treasury bill, an investor gives money to a borrower. So this money is known as the price, right? So the investor buys the treasury bill. They give money to the government for a certain price. And then after a certain number of days, the government pays back the face value. So in this case, we were told the face value is 10,000. So you just substitute 10,000 multiplied by 1 minus our discount rate, right, of 0.0174. You change it to a decimal, multiplied by 153 over 600. If you simply, I'm sorry, 153 over 360. If you simplify this part, we get 0.07395. Then we subtract from 1 multiplied by 10,000, and we get 9,926.05. Okay. Next, I want you to try number 2. Assume that the 60-day LIBOR is 4.35%. So let's say assume that you want to borrow money for 60 days. Let's say a London bank wants to borrow US dollars for 60 days. And let's say the interest rate they are charged is 4.35%, right? You are based in London and need to borrow $20 million for 60 days. What is the total amount you owe in 60 days? What is the total amount you owe in 60 days? So in other words, they want you to calculate this, the total amount owed after a certain number of days. So again, I want you to put the video on pause, try to substitute each of the amounts you've been given and try to do that calculation. And then when you're done, put the video on play, and then we'll compare what I have with what you have. Okay, hopefully you were able to do that calculation, and hopefully you got 20,145,000. This is another simple calculation that I don't think I need to put on the calculator. You just follow this exactly as it is, right? 20 million times open bracket 1 plus 0.0435 times 60 over 360. You simplify this part, you get 1.00725. Multiply that by 20 million and you get 20,145,000. Okay. So those are 2 common questions that could come in the exam. Don't take those marks for granted. Make sure you know how to do those calculations, right? So let's continue with forward rate agreements, okay? So with forward rate agreements, you also have to know FRA notation and interpretation, right? So we are now back to interest rate forward rate agreements we were talking about, right? So sometimes you can get a notation like this, like you can have one number multiplied by another number. They can say it's a 1/3 FRA contract, a 1/3 forward rate agreement. And when they say that a contract is a 1/3 FRA contract, they mean to say that the contract expires in 1 month, and once the contract is expired for 1 month, you want to borrow or invest money for 3 minus 1 month, meaning for 2 months, right? And then we can change that to days by saying 2 times 30, giving us 60 days. Okay, so if we say A by B FRA, we mean that the forward rate agreement expires in A months, right? And you can borrow or lend, meaning the forward rate agreement, is based on a LIBOR rate of B minus 8 times 30 days, right? So that's what this is telling us. It's telling us when you can borrow. The first number here tells us when we can borrow or lend the money. That's when the contract is expiring, right? And then the last number minus the first number tells us how long we can borrow or lend for in months. So 3 minus 1 means we want to enter into a contract to borrow or lend for 2 months. So we usually change those 2 months into days. So we would say 2 times 30, meaning 60 days. So if we say 1/3 FRA, we mean that you want to borrow or lend in 1 month, which is 30 days, and you want to borrow or lend for 3 minus 1, 2 months, which is 60 days. You want to borrow or lend for 60 days, right? I can explain that again using this, where they say a 1/4 FRA. If they say 1/4 FRA, it means that you want to borrow or lend in 1 month, right? Meaning the contract is expiring in 1 month. You want to borrow or lend in 1 month. And you want to borrow or lend for 4 minus 1 month, meaning you want to borrow or lend for 3 months. And then we can multiply these 3 months by 30 to change it to days. So you want to borrow or lend for 90 days, and you want to do that in 1 month. That's when the contract is expiring. So that's what these notations of 1/4 or 3/4 mean, right? So it's not always that these days to expiry are days like this, whereby they are months, and then we can multiply by 30. And we can get 90 days or 180 days or 60 days and so forth. If the days to expiration are not months, right? So let's say they are not months. Let's say they say that the contract is expiring in 27 days and you want to borrow or lend for 134 days. So those are not months, those are actually days. If the days to expiration are not months and the underlying is also not in months, i.e. the days that the derivative contract, if the days to expiration are not months and the number of time you want to borrow or lend for is also not in months, let's say it's in days, we say that the FRA contract is off the run, right? It's off the run. So for example, let's say we are told we have an FRA that's expiring in 37 days. So you can't say this is 1 month, this is 37 days, we have a 7 days, not 30 days. So if we say we have an FRA expiring in 37 days and it's based on the 127-day LIBOR, we say that this is off the run because we are dealing with days which are not proper months. Okay. So lastly, in this video, I want to talk about how to price value and to also determine the payoff of a forward rate agreement, right? I want to talk about how to determine the price, value, and payoff of a forward rate agreement. Now, to determine the price, meaning the FRA rate on a forward rate agreement, there are some important formulas that you need to know about to determine the price, the value, as well as the payoff. On the exam paper, they give the following formula for the FRA rate, but the way they wrote this, it can be a bit misleading, especially these parts. So I prefer to write the formula as follows, where I put this H plus M before the days over 360 and this H before the H over 360. I prefer to write the formula like this. And H is the number of days till expiration. So these are the number of days that pass before you want to borrow or lend the money. This M is the underlying days. So this is the number of days you want to borrow or lend the money for. So let's say you want to borrow or lend money in 30 days, that would be H. And let's say you want to borrow or lend the money for 180 days, that would be M, right? And then LO H plus M, this is the LIBOR rate for H plus M days at time 0, meaning this is the interest you get charged, the London interbank rate you get charged at time 0 if you borrow money for H plus M days. LOH, this is the LIBOR rate for H days at time 0. So this is the interest you get charged for borrowing money today for H days at time 0 if it's between interbank banks. So please remember, the thing with forward rate agreements is that you are here today, right? And then you want to wait a certain amount of time, known as the days to expiration. This is H days. And then once you get to H days, you want to borrow or lend a certain amount of money for M days. So everything is going to happen over H plus M days. So with a forward rate agreement, you are at time 0 and you want to borrow or lend at time H. And you want to borrow or lend the money that you're going to borrow or lend at time H, you want to borrow or lend it for M days. So it means when you pay back the money or you receive the money back, it will be H plus M days that have passed. So days to expiration just means the number of days that pass before you actually borrow or lend the money. Then we can also determine the value of a forward rate agreement using the following formula. So it's the value at time G. Let's say G days have passed. Yeah, we use the following formula. It's 1 over 1 plus LG, H minus D over 360, 1 plus the FRA rate we calculated before. It will be this FR rate that we would have calculated here, that we substitute here, multiplied by M over 360, 1 plus LG, H plus M minus D multiplied by H plus M minus D over 360. So again, the formula on the exam sheet can be a bit misleading. They don't put the H minus G here and the H plus M minus G here. So I've just put it here so that you get the accurate formula in the textbook. So G is the number of days that have passed since you entered into the forward rate agreement. LG, H minus D, this is the LIBOR rate at time G based on H minus D days. Otherwise, it's the cost of borrowing money, London interbank rate for H minus D days if you borrow the money at time G. H plus M minus G, this is the cost of borrowing money for H plus M minus G days if you borrow the money at time G, the London interbank rate. So this diagram can help us to illustrate this. We were at time 0 initially, and then G days have passed. And then we have a forward rate agreement, and we want to determine its value at time G. H is still the time to expiration, and you want to borrow the funds for M days. So we have now gone from time 0 to time G. We are now determining the value of the contracts that we've entered into at time G. And then lastly, the payoff of a forward rate agreement is given by the following formula. We take our notional principal multiplied by the underlying rate minus the FRA rate that we will have calculated before. The underlying rate will be the actual LIBOR rate at expiration, meaning that when we are now actually at H, we have been guaranteed this rate to borrow or lend for M days. But what is everyone else in the market paying? Underlying rate is what everyone else will be paying, whilst you are able to pay or to receive the FRA rate. So the underlying rate is a rate that you'll be given. It's the rate at expiration. Underlying days, the underlying days is just another way of saying M days. It's the days you want to borrow or lend for. So it's important to familiarize yourself with these formulas, right? It's important to familiarize yourself with these formulas. So this will give us the payoff, the actual profits that you get at expiration, right? And something important to note is that if you borrow, if you're the party who wishes to hedge against the rise in interest rates, let's say you want to borrow money sometime in the future and you're afraid that interest rates are going to go up. If you're going to borrow money sometime in the future and you want to protect your position, otherwise, in other words, you want to borrow and you want to make sure that interest rates are fixed, they don't go high, we say that you are the long party in the forward rate agreement, right? On the other hand, let's say you are the party who wants to protect yourself against a drop in interest rates. Let's say you want to invest money, but you're afraid that interest rates will go down by the time you want to invest, meaning you want to protect your position against the fall in interest rates. We say that you are the short party in the forward rate agreement. So these are also, sometimes they can give you a question and they can say the corporation wants to hedge against the rise in interest rates. And then they can say, what position should you enter in the FRA? It means you should be a long party. But if you want to hedge against a drop in interest rates, it means you should take a short position. Okay. So to finish off this video, I want us to look at question 14 on page 69 of the prescribed textbook, question 14, right here. So the question says, I just want to illustrate how to actually do calculations here as we finish this off. A corporate treasurer wishes to hedge against an increase in future borrowing costs. So they want to lend, they want to borrow. Okay, they want to borrow. And remember, I just said if you want to borrow, if you want to hedge against borrowing, you should be the long party. So, of course, due to a possible rise in short-term interest rates, she proposes to hedge this risk by entering into a long position in a 6x12 FRA. The current term structure for LIBOR is as follows. So, to borrow money for 30 days, London Interbank rate. The London Interbank rate of borrowing is 5.1%, 90 days 5.25%, 180 days 5.7%, 360 days 5.95%. Indicate when the 6x12 FRA expires and identify which term of the LIBOR this FRA is based on. So this FRA expires in 6 months because that's the first number we have there. 6 months, it expires in 180 days. And it's based on, in other words, the number of days you want to borrow or lend for. You want to borrow or lend, actually this corporate treasurer wants to borrow for 6 minus 12 months. So the underlying LIBOR is based on 12 minus 6 months. The underlying LIBOR is also based on 6 months, right? So the contract expires in 6 by 30 days, which is 180 days. And it's based on the 12 minus 6 days, 12 minus 6 months times 30 days, 180-day LIBOR. So remember, the first number tells you when the contract expires, when you are allowed to borrow or lend. And then 12 minus 6 gives you the number of months you want to borrow or lend for. In other words, that's the LIBOR rate that the FRA is based on. The FRA is going to be based on a LIBOR rate of 12 minus 6 months, which is 180 days. Okay. So the next part of the question wanted you to calculate the forward rate agreement, right? What I want you to do actually here for practice, just for practice, and since I want you to try to do this calculation, I want you to try to use these formulas that I gave you, these formulas. I want you to try to use these formulas to try to determine your FRA rate, your 6x12 FRA rate, and to also use those formulas to try to determine the market value of the FRA, and lastly, to determine the payoff. I want you to try to do that and put the video on pause, give that a go, and then when you're done, you can press play, and then I'll give you the rest of the explanation. Or rather, since the video is gone a bit long now, I want you to rather but it's fine, put the video on pause, try it, and we'll finish it together. I just want you to first try part B. Can you try to determine the 6x12 FRA based on this formula? Based on this formula right here. This one. And then when you're done, try to identify what H is, what M is, and then when you're done, press play, and then we'll check to see what you have with what I will put up on the screen. Okay. Okay, so hopefully you were able to identify that H is 180 and M is 180. And hopefully you were able to substitute everything you had to substitute into the formula to get your answer. Okay. So H is 6 by 30, which is 180. And M is 180 days. You want to borrow land for 180 days, right? It's based on the 180-day LIBOR. And then this is the LIBOR rate for 360 days. And this part is the LIBOR rate for 180 days, which is 5.7. So we can substitute that into our formula right here. So remember, these are LIBOR rates. These are LIBOR rates that you get, the LIBOR rate for H plus M days and the LIBOR rate for H days. And these were given in the table. LIBOR rate for H days, which is 180 days. LIBOR rate for H plus M days, which is 360 days. So you substitute those two, right? And you simplify these two parts, right? And then you multiply by 360 over 2. I hope you were able to do this calculation. I think it's better if you do it bit by bit. You just enter it into your calculator. Maybe I should just put that up. Like, for example, for the first part of the calculation, you say 1 plus 0.0595 multiplied by open bracket 360 divided by 360 close bracket. Okay, so that's how you get 1.0595 right here. So you do the same for the bottom part. You just enter this in as it is into your calculator, and then you get 1.0285 minus 1. You simplify this bit by bit and you multiply by 2, and this gives you the FRA rate, right? And then part B says calculate the, okay, we did part B. And then part C says, suppose that the treasurer went long on the forward rate agreement and that 45 days have passed since the beginning of the contract. And these are the new term structure of interest rates. So 45 days later, to borrow money for 135 days is 5.9%. To borrow money for 315 days is 6.15%, right? And then you are being asked to calculate the market value of this forward rate agreement based on a notional principal of 10 million. So to calculate the value of the contract 45 days later, I've already substituted here, but we use this formula. So the idea behind this formula is that you need to identify what H is. H we know is 180. G is 45 because it's 45 days later, and M is 180. So if you substitute all those numbers, M180, M180, if you substitute all those where they're supposed to be, you end up with something like this, which then simplifies to this right here. So this L45 135 is just the LIBOR rate for 135 days when you borrow after 45 days, right? And this L45 315 is just the LIBOR for 315 days if you borrow the money after 45 days. So these are the two rates that are now given in this table. So we substitute those two rates into our formula, 0.0590, which is the 135-day rate, and 0.0615, which is the 315-day rate. And then 1 plus 0.0603, this is our FRA rate that we calculated initially. And then this is M over 360. This is where we say H plus M minus G over 360. And then this is 1 plus, this is H minus G over 360, 135. So we enter this into our calculator. You do this bit by bit. You do the bottom part, right? To do the calculation for the bottom part there, for the bottom part, just to show you how we got 1.022125. You say 1 plus 0.0590 multiplied by open bracket 135 divided by 360 close bracket, and you get 1.022125. Okay, so that's how you would get this first part, and then you would do the same for the top part and the bottom part. Then you subtract and you get this answer, but to get the actual value you multiply by the notional principal, and then that gives you 7,970. The answer in the textbook is slightly different due to rounding off, right? So if the answer is positive, it means it's a positive value to the long party and it's a loss to the short party. Then lastly, at expiration, the 180-day LIBOR is 6.25%. Calculates the payoff on the FRA. Does the treasurer receive a payment or make a payment to the dealer? So at expiration, we can get the payoff on the contract. Like this is like the final profit on the contract. And we use this following formula, right? And we said M, the underlying days is 180. These are the number of days you are borrowing or lending for. The FRA rate is what we calculated at the beginning. And the underlying rate is the rate at expiration that we actually have for borrowing or lending the money. So we substitute that information into our formula, right? Multiplied by the notional principal. You do your calculation bit by bit. You start with the top part, open bracket 0.0625 minus 0.0603, close bracket times 180 divided by 360. Let me just put this calculation here just to illustrate to you. We would say open bracket 0.0625 minus 0.0603 close bracket times 180 divided by 360, and we get 0.0011. Okay, so that's how we got the top part. You do the same for the bottom part, 1 plus. There are no brackets here. Please note it's 1 plus 0.0625. You enter it in exactly as it is. You get 1.03125. Then you simplify this and it gives you 10,667. So this is a payoff to the long party. Remember, in this module, whatever value we calculate the values to the long party. So this answer is positive. So it means it's a payoff to the long party made by the short party. So the short party pays the long party this amount of money. And remember, we said that the treasurer of the corporation is taking a long position. So this means that the corporation will receive a payment of this amount from the dealer, since the dealer is the short party. So for homework, please try question 15 in the textbook. It's a similar question to what we were doing, but it's good for you to practice just to see if you can identify what your FRA rates are, what each term and what terminology is being used, and how to do the calculation just to pick up certain mistakes. So when we meet next time, we'll start looking at the next study unit, which is futures. This will be a bit shorter because a lot of the things we look at in futures, they're just a repeat of what we were covering. So we'll look at chapter 3, futures. And thank you for listening to the video. My number is up on the screen. If you have any queries about anything I was covering in here, some things you really didn't follow, please feel free to let me know via WhatsApp or give me a call. I might not always be able to respond due to business and other commitments, but I'll try to get back to you as soon as I can. Thank you very much. I hope this recording has been helpful.